Well, welcome back. A survey shows more than half of those in the United States say it's unacceptable for the government to monitor their digital communications. Yet the U.S. National Security Agency has been accused of doing just that. Join us again to discuss this is Carrie Cordero, the Director of National Security Studies at Georgetown University here in Washington. Diana Perkempner is a spokesperson for Human Rights Watch, one of the organizations which filed the lawsuit. She joins us from New York. And Sunday Yukubaitis is the president of Golden Frog, a global online services provider. And he joins us from Austin, Texas. Dana, I want to get back to you again. And, you know, there were many questions raised after we saw those revelations from Edward Snowden about spying in the country, about people's communications being monitored, etc. Looking at maybe some of the errors that were made in intelligence gathering that led to the 9/11 attacks, is it perhaps understandable why the NSA is engaged in this kind of monitoring, or for that matter, the CIA, going to extraordinary lengths to prevent something like that happening again?
I think it's understandable why intelligence agencies want to acquire as much intelligence as they possibly can. But I think the case is far from proven that this kind of massive ingestion of data is actually doing anything to make us safer. Unfortunately, what we learned from the commission that looked into the 9/11 incidents is not that but for massive surveillance, we would have known all about it. In fact, we already knew quite a bit about the plotters and the people who were involved. We just didn't connect the dots. Such a huge information overload makes it ever more difficult to connect the dots. We've seen that over and over again. The Boston bombing, the Charlie Hebdo incident, these were not incidents that if only we had had greater surveillance, we would have known more and we would have been able to prevent. We already knew that there were dangerous people, suspects, things that were amiss, and we just failed to connect the dots. Everybody in the world's privacy doesn't need to be sacrificed in order for us to do better on national security protection.
All right, Carrie, and that has been the criticism. Does it work?
So, yes, and I think it's really important to distinguish between the foreign intelligence collection, the surveillance that was done pre and right after September 11, 2001, versus the types of surveillance that's being conducted today. The part of what the 9/11 Commission identified was the lack of information sharing and also a lack of certain surveillance authorities, abilities where the rules governing the surveillance for national security purposes were more stringent than they were on the criminal side. And so a number of our laws have been amended since 2001 to bring collection under a statutory framework. So there is a big difference between the way that these surveillances are being conducted today and pursuant to the FISA Amendments Act versus, for example, the post-9/11 surveillance that's come under criticism.
Let's look at a basic question of whether this works. We have surveillance going on, people's communications may be being listened to, maybe being read, etc. Yet you had the Boston bombing. How did that happen?
There are, and certainly, you know, there have been reviews that have looked at that, but certainly I think anybody looking at the Boston bombing case would recognize that there is a difference in terms of the substantial nature of that plot, as unfortunate and tragic as it was, versus something that's been on the scale of a September 11, 2001, which we have not seen since then. But I think sort of before the break, some of the comments that are made demonstrate the difficulty that's going to come to play in this particular case, this Wikimedia case. And that is that the actual way that upstream is conducted, some of that still is information that the government has not declassified. And so there is going to be a issue, it's called the state secrets privilege, which is, will the litigation be able to continue given that there still are probably aspects of the how of this collection, how it's conducted, that the government is going to assert can't be exposed publicly.
Okay. Donna, you want to say something?
Yes, I have to object to some of the impressions that Carrie's giving. First of all, the main change after 9/11 was to take what was illegal surveillance and essentially make it legal, but that didn't mean that it made it necessary or proportionate. Secondly, There have been very little evidence that but for mass surveillance, a terrorist plot or even a serious security incident would have been averted. And it has been manifestly in the government's interest to put forward such cases. Third, the reason it's so difficult to have this conversation is precisely the point that Carrie just made. Whenever there is a challenge to government to please show us the beef, show us how this actually is necessary or proportionate, the veil of secrecy is drawn. We are told that if we learn more about it, or if we tell you more about it, we're going to compromise your national security. Trust us. It's time that the government actually explain, and this lawsuit is an effort to get at least one branch of government asking another branch of government to give us some answers.
Sunday, a lot of the data collection here that we're looking at targets foreigners. How does this affect foreigners? People who may be, who are of course outside the country, but also Americans' communications with foreigners.
Well, at some of the steps I went over how they collect it, there's plenty of room for inaccuracies and how they collect it. They could, create where data is being collected from the domestic side and people here in the United States. But, going back to the previous discussion, I think there is possibly a simpler answer. We need to protect ourselves. We cannot wait for policy. I had the privilege to sit down with Edward Snowden at the South by Southwest Festival here in Austin this weekend with about 20 other tech leaders. And his message was very clear. We can't wait for policy. It's going to lag behind. In fact, the government is hardening its policy, and we need to build tools as a tech community to protect ourselves. So that's going to solve a lot of this. I think the lawsuit is a good step and tremendous, but lawsuits take a long time. I'll use the example of the lawsuit filed back in 2006 for when it was disclosed that NSA was tapping the AT&T's fiber room. That lawsuit took till 2011, 2014 to really resolve itself. In the space of that time, we saw that happening. We started a company and started building products called Golden Frog and built a personal VPN product called Viper VPN that encrypts connections. So it solves a lot of this, and that's what Snowden was saying this weekend is really, I called it a call to arms to build the technologies that's going to allow citizens to protect themselves, because fundamentally, I feel like encryption is the Second Amendment for the internet. So we've got to start building those tools, and it can't be just Golden Frog. It's got to be, we can't just have a battleship of a couple big companies. We need an armada. Yeah. We need other people to start building services, and that's what Snowden was saying. So policy is good and lawsuits are good, but technology is a piece of the solution here. Okay,
Carrie, these protections that we have here in the United States don't extend to people living outside the United States. I mean, we do know that. But the plaintiffs in this lawsuit are claiming that their information, their communications, are being unconstitutionally seized, regardless of whether they're talking to someone here or overseas.
Right. So the way that would be described, it's called incidental collection. So the target is actually a foreign person located outside the United States. The purpose is to collect foreign intelligence information. But because that person might be in communication with somebody here in the U.S., that U.S. end could be incidentally collected. The question then is, how does NSA handle that information? Are they using it in an inappropriate way, or are they handling it appropriately, where if it doesn't contain foreign intelligence information, nothing happens to it, and then they follow their retention procedures, and eventually that information would just go away. And so the question really is the information being handled lawfully, used appropriately, and in accordance with all the procedures and the oversight mechanisms that have been put in place?
But it's a point that Sunday was making, basically the government saying, trust us. Go ahead, Donna, I've got 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's not about whether it's being handled. It's about how it's being collected as well. It doesn't matter if you have a surveillance camera in your bedroom and the government promises, look, we're just filming. We'll follow all legal procedures before we take a peek. I think it will still harm you and inhibit your behavior. This is about the rights of everybody, Americans as well as foreigners, and it's about the government taking your communications, regardless of how that's handled as well.
Okay, and we are going to have to end it there. We've run out of time. That's all we have time for, but the conversation continues online. Join us on CCTV America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter at CCTV America. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.